we should get started. Catherine, would you like to do us the honours of Welcome to Country?
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, I guess it's really important to acknowledge the country where I am today on Art of the Country and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to extend that respect to the Ngambara and Pindabi people, predominantly where I've been working for the past 12 years. And a lot of the conversations and really my Montessori journey began because of my work out on that beautiful country. Ngambara Pindabi region is the size of Tasmania. It's a huge, broad space, with so many very important, significant sites all over that country. So I think it's really important to honour the children, honour the people and the families and the custodians of those places that in many ways, from an education perspective, are really like a forgotten place within the education sector. So yeah, it's important that we also acknowledge the countries of where you are all today. Some Ngunnawal, some Ngambri. Yeah, I think it's important to often kind of think about the people and the land of where you are, not just from like a historical context as well, but from a contemporary context, because there are First Nations people all over this country that have amazing stories and amazing histories. So yeah, I think about the First Nations people of today, I think is, and how we can do better in the future of making sure that their practices, their cultural practices, and those ways of being are really kind of embedded within our own story, in our classrooms, in our homes, in the way that we, kind of move around the places that we live. So yeah, thank you.
Well, welcome also Catherine Holmes, the soon-to-be Dr. Catherine Holmes, just finished your PhD.
Yeah.
Why don't you start by telling us, for those who don't know you, your Montessori story? How did you discover Montessori and end up where you are now?
Yeah, well, I was a new grad out, had gone to work in a remote community, Kiwakura, which is, at the time I'd heard about it, was the most remote community in Australia, and second in the world, apparently. And I knew I wanted to go and teach somewhere. And this little, bit of information about the most remote in Australia had always kind of stayed with me. And so I actually rang the Ngambara Land School and said, hi, I'm a new grad, I'd like to go and teach in Kiwakura. And the lady immediately, who was the executive principal at the time, said, are you sure? Do you know where that is? Like, really, you're really sure? I was like, yes, obviously this doesn't happen very often. But yeah, that's where I want to go and teach. And the toolkit that I had when I arrived, like many of us know, everything that I had in my toolkit as an early childhood trained teacher, I didn't even take it out of the box, and so one of my girlfriends, she had just started working at a Montessori school, Blue Gum in Perth, and she and I were on the phone and she's like, I'm teaching kids how to sew buttons and polish shoes. And when I said, well, I've got kids that, no one speaks any English. They're all family related. Everyone literally has, speaking their own language. And so immediately a whole classroom can just like stand up and leave your classroom and you don't even know what's happening. So the more and more we spoke and the more and more that I learned more about Montessori through her, the wonderful Catherine Day, she really opened my eyes. And Blue Gum Montessori has been a phenomenal supporter of me for, 12 years, over a decade. Rachel is still sending resources to different schools that are working out in remote areas. We've also had amazing support from Melbourne Montessori, from Kingsley Montessori, from a range of schools, Brisbane, all across Australia, that have really supported the process along the way. So I started really simply by making, Montessori-styled anything out of resources, out of things from the tip, from storage cupboards, just it was repurposing at the best. Because there is one community store, the nearest town centre was 700 kilometres away, and that had a Kmart and a Target at the time. So there just wasn't a lot of ways of being able to simply make the materials itself. So the wonderful Alex Dillon, who was working with MCF at the time, and Kay Bolden, who just so generously actually came out and worked with me side by side in creating our own Montessori space. It was a spindle box. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. A spindle box made from a cardboard box with paddle pops. We made pouring from just, we would empty Vegemite jars and fill them up to make different kind of pouring of vessels. And, we used bits of rice sometimes, but any kind of natural material that we had, we used it. We made number rods, colouring different sticks, just like anything and everything. It just really showed that Montessori materials, it was not the be all and end all of the practices that we were trying to incorporate, but it was more around just setting up a classroom and setting up that independence. And it's been a phenomenal journey. Very sadly, due to, it's really hard to get staff in remote communities, particularly that are, early childhood trained as well as Montessori trained. It's just absolutely impossible. Even though we had some, amazing people come out and do really wonderful work, it's that continuous and long process. So in 2013, I really kind of changed my the practices that I was using in those classrooms and started doing a lot of training with Nandara and Pintupi people who were already working in the school, and really kind of being able to, so we would work after school and I would show people how to use the number rods, how to use all these different kind of materials that we were using. I would show the adults and families that were working in the school, or people who would just be coming in and out of the school. And I trained those people in how to use, like, to give the presentation. So when the children came in the next day, or the children wanted to use that material, it was the Nandara and Pintupi people that were in that classroom that were actually delivering that presentation in children's first languages in a culturally appropriate way. And, regardless of whether it was a spindle box from a wood, from a cardboard box and pop sticks, it was, the most important factor was that families were in the classroom and they were delivering the presentations themselves. And that has, again, been one of the really strong and really important factors in a Montessori teaching and learning context, is that the onus comes off the teacher. It's not the teacher that's singing and dancing up the front in English. It's actually parents and families being able to be involved in the learning space themselves. So yeah, I guess that's from there. My experiences with Montessori have, I went and worked at Canberra Montessori for a year, which was fantastic. And, during that time completed my Master of Education, which was around Montessori in First Nations communities, particularly in Nandara and Pintupi region, mostly around that transition of how do you go from being a public education school, early childhood classroom, how do you transition Montessori education into those classrooms? But whilst I was in Canberra, I applied for a scholarship to do a PhD through ANU at CAPER, the Centre for Aboriginal Economic Policy Research. And really, I came to the conclusion really that instead of going in with the idea of saying, okay, Montessori is, the best solution for a pedagogy within this context, I kind of wanted to step back and see, okay, well, what kind of research is around 0 to 6-year-old First Nations children preschool? What is the type of learning that is happening before children are arriving into that context? And so the study that I've just completed is around 0 to 6 years old children in the Nandara Pintupi region, and what are their kind of sociocultural practices at home in their community. And voila, what happens at the end? It's that, well, guess what? Montessori education is actually, the best outside alternative method that can support children within that context. So instead of going in talking about Montessori, I've kind of just left it for the majority, for most of the study, and then just kind of been like, well, guess what at the end? And here's Montessori, and this is actually something that would be the best Western termed or non-First Nations kind of developed program that would support these children and their learning in that learning context.
What is it that makes Montessori the best outside program?
In terms of a culturally responsive pedagogy, I think the greatest thing, and as we all know for cultures all around the world, is children's independence. Now, independence, autonomy, and autonomy are the two greatest things in my eyes around Montessori, and particularly within the First Nations context. It's harnessed in a way where children and families, really is that important factor, is that families can be involved within the context, and they can be delivering the presentations, they can be delivering the teaching, they can be delivering it one-to-one with children. So I think it's the end of independence and autonomy, absolutely.
Last time we spoke, you were telling some stories about when you first went out and were delivering Montessori in the way that you received in training, and the reactions of the children in your class. Can you tell some of those again?
Yeah, of course. Well, I don't know, we just had these, I always loved this idea of when you have these moments as a teacher, these pinnacle moments of, I'm going to open up the book and I'll read the story, and everyone will just be so engrossed, and they'll all be sitting on the mat, crossing their legs, and, that like I'm a real teacher now, like this is it. But, like I said before, a whole classroom of children, without you even realizing, in a language that they all speak, can just stand up and totally disappear from the context. So Montessori, in a way, just kind of allowed me to stop being that singing and dancing and show telling early childhood teacher. And a simple thing like teachers have huge, ginormous boxes of Lego, that thing of, okay, so we're all playing Lego now, let's pack it away. All the kids would kind of just move away, and, no one wanted to help, everyone would leave. But the first kind of Montessori styled experience of this was that, we didn't have any mats to create this kind of independent little workspaces, but we got hoops. So all the kids, they had their little bit of Lego, individually bagged Lego, and the Lego was in a hoop, and they sat within that hoop, and whoever finished in that hoop then had to, that was your space, and you had to pack that away and clean that up. But then it just kind of continually, it just evolved and evolved and evolved in a way that, setting up a classroom, pulling absolutely everything out. And if anyone has been into, an early childhood storeroom or a remote community early childhood classroom storeroom, those things look like a bomb has got off, and someone's just shut the door and said, I'm never going to open that cupboard again. And, the next person who comes, which is probably likely sometimes a term, 6 months, 12 months, a couple of years, but maximum is that staff are staying there for kind of 4 years, absolutely maximum, generally. But they just wait for someone else to clean it up. So we did the full Montessori. We took all the doors off the hinges, pulled everything out, and really kind of reordered and restructured the whole space, that children had open access to everything. But one of the key problems in remote communities has been the implementation of a program called CDP, CDEP or RJCP. There's been many iterations of it, but it's basically a social security program where adults have to log their hours of work to be able to receive their social security payments. Now, there's been a lot of research around CDP and the kind of the problems with a program on families and adults, but there hasn't been a lot of research around the impacts of such a policy on children. But children, there wasn't a lot of money around, and in these communities there is an extreme level of poverty. So children were coming to school very hungry, and instead of setting up these big feeding, we obviously did lots of prepared environment, but just cooking and food preparation was such a huge part of those programs, because we were able to set up little trays of individualized kind of wheat bix, and people were making their own toast, and the kids are making their own bread. We were able to get, it might have only been tinned fruit or something because there was just no fruit in the store, but the children were, an activity was using the can opener and opening it up and taking out a serving of the, 2 fruits, tins and peaches and pears, and setting up some kind of tray. But it wasn't this kind of paternalistic, okay, now it's recess time, and at 10:15, we're all going to have morning tea. It was more around setting up those spaces of, if you came in at 8 o'clock and you were starving, then you just go and have some food, and one of the children might stay there and just eat a lot of food. And that food preparation was all around setting those practices of you make the food, you eat the food, you wash it up. We had all the washing stations, setting it all up and setting it up for the next person. And there was only one tray of wheat bix, one of bread, or we even had Vegemite and things on like Cruskets and that kind of stuff. But it really kind of, it lit your heart in so many ways, because you could see that although Montessori has so many, I call it ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, this kind of academics importance of the materials, but really the foundation of the work was kind of surrounding children with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is if you're hungry, then, really no learning can take place. So, it was definitely challenging, and, to set up a public Montessori space where you're doing that transition and getting children into those cycles of, okay, well, what work are you going to choose now? What's the job that you're going to choose now? There was a lot of, support from families in first languages to be able to set up that routine and that practice. But yeah, it came through in dividends, and, we've had over the years, had lots of support from the Department of Education in WA. By the end of 2014, we had 4 Montessori styled early childhood classes in that Narngara region, with lots of support from Julia Hilson and Kay and Alex. Megan Tyne came out, and we did lots of, kind of in training with families. But yeah, it was an amazing process, but all just made too difficult because of staffing. Staffing is very tricky in those locations.
So you said it's not true that you have to have Ninhu's materials to be able to implement a Montessori program.
Not. Look, having worked at CMS, like, those materials are beautiful. Like, that they are so beautiful and so worth it. But they are not the be all and end all. And like, even here in Bantu Alice Springs, I do just ideas for families around how to create play spaces in your home. And that is always the first thing that I say to people is like, yes, I'm Montessori trained, but please do not go home and Google, Montessori materials and spend thousands of dollars, hundreds of dollars, whatever it is that, it's actually those routines and the practices and allowing space. I think within any early childhood teacher, it's all about transitions and movements and getting 30 children, 25 children from one location to the next, and how you're going to, but sometimes it's not the materials, it's how you kind of create that space yourself and time.
So for you, the essence of the Montessori approach is creating that space for children to be who they are and attain independence.
Yeah.
How else did you have to adapt what you learned in training to be able to implement Montessori in remote Australia with Indigenous cultures?
Yeah. I think there's such a value in Montessori in the way that you create a community environment within your early childhood space. And yes, children want to be able to see them and their culture within that space. And so we made sure that we had lots of pictures of artists from around that context within the classroom. It's just so beautiful to see children kind of at one desk up against a wall doing their number rods, and right up above, on that wall was one of their family's pieces of artwork, which is so important. And I think, from an independent, a child working one-to-one or just with themselves independently on work is you can create a context where it is like a home. You are having lots of pictures of those kind of things around. But it's also really important to acknowledge that a lot of media, in my eyes, often kind of over exoticizes desert, particularly Western desert children's lives, and these kind of pictures of children all painted up, and it for me, it kind of oversimplifies their life in many ways. And now, because of digital technology and YouTube and all these things that are coming across children's eyes because of social media and YouTube videos in that kind of way, it's also really important to create a space where children are exposed to that wider world. And Montessori is a great place through simply something like 3-part cards. We had 3-part cards of children's bodies, of children's faces, naming all the different body parts, naming different facial expressions, all those kind of things. But we also made these kind of DIY 3-part cards of Mbantua, Alice Springs, where's the hospital, the front, like a picture of the front of the hospital, where is the post office, or where do you need to go at the police station, or where do you need to go, to all those kind of town-based locations as well. So although Montessori really, and we had them in first language, in Ngandara and in Pindabi and in English. So Montessori has some amazing, language materials in that way that really can diversify, from that really community-based perspective, but then also kind of broaden out children's, the understandings of a contemporary First Nations child as well.
Can you tell us more about your research?
Yeah. So the research is based in 3 remote communities within that region, Kiwakura, Papalankucha or Blackstone and Warburton. 30 children were not selected, but just through my kind of the meaningful relationships that I had with children and their families. And these children were aged between 0 and 6. And in the kind of the most recent research that has done something similar, the research was taken place in the late 1960s and it was published in the early 1970s. It's kind of around child rearing practices in a First Nations location. So it's not based around nothing. I didn't look at anything within a school context. It wasn't an evaluation of early childhood programs. But what I really wanted to understand was what is the cultural and sociocultural learning that's happening outside of school in that demographic. And obviously, there's been lots of different avenues that's kind of come from the research in terms of findings. But I think one of the key practices, or the key findings that has come through in children's practices, is those distinctive societal practices that are happening with children. So, for instance, when this really shone through from the research was that at the time I did half of my fieldwork when I was pregnant, and the other half was when my daughter Lou was with me. And on this occasion, I was sitting down with some mums and families and, biological mothers and kinship mothers, grandmas. And the children had, we actually got all the children these little kind of GoPro styled cameras. So they were kind of videoing themselves and taking pictures of the things that they were doing during the day outside of school. And on this occasion, Lou, my daughter, she was down on the mat, like in the circle that we were sitting. And I totally missed it, at the time, because you're kind of recording, and I was, looking up to her and talking to people and, kind of probing into these questions. But on one of the photos that the children took, I noticed that someone had their hand over Lou's head. And so I spoke to one of the community-based research collaborators that I was working with and said, why would they have put their hand, or what's happening here? And the instant response was, oh, yeah, well, when the baby sneezes, you have to put your hand over their head to kind of catch their spirit so that it doesn't, leave their body. And then it just kind of opens this plethora of kind of discussions and conversations around these kind of practices. So when two babies can't walk, the two babies are not allowed to physically touch at all, because it's perceived that the younger baby will steal the older baby's growing power, and they'll actually physically attribute that man is a short-statured, guy, or is shorter or skinnier or really much smaller than other people in the community, because he must have touched another baby when he, touched someone else when he was a baby. Or there's other, kind of cultural practices around babies being smoked, and that's quite a common, feature of First Nations communities around Australia, is that, a baby will be taken out to their grandmother's country, and they're naked, and they'll be passed through the smoke of a specific type of tree, type of branch, and they're given this like small ash across their forehead that, many babies that, there are some babies that haven't had this done, that don't appear to be families for whatever reason. Maybe they've been unwell or have been staying, in town for a longer period of time. And they'll say until that baby has had that kind of distinctive practice, that, they won't be able to grow up and to be a happy and healthy, kind of spiritually connected young First Nations child from that region. There's also, when babies have hiccups, they'll often, reach to a fire that has obviously not hot ash, and they'll place ash kind of over the top of their chest. So the more and more that I kind of learnt about these distinctive practices from this one photo that just happened to be captured with Lou, it's opened this understanding of things that haven't been documented before within the region, that as an early childhood educator, if you are working in a 0 to 6 year old space, you really need to be aware of these kind of practices, because if you say, oh, all the babies down on the mat, let's have some tummy time, or, whatever you might set up, and then wonder why everyone doesn't want to put their babies next door to each other. It's kind of, in close touching range. It's not that people don't want to be a part of the early childhood space. Maybe they're just conscious that they just don't want their babies to touch, and that they're like long-lasting impacts of those kind of practices. And I kind of term it as there's these kind of invisible layers of meaning. So the research was able to kind of start to pull apart some of those invisible things that are happening within that cultural space with children aged 0 to 3, which has been, I'm very, very privileged to be a part of that. And it's it's taken 12 years of, of relationships and trustworthiness and this slow approach. And it's not like as a researcher, but as a mother, as an educator, you don't want someone to come in and do an observation for 2 seconds. Like we're all Montessorians, we know is that observation. It's a watchfulness. It takes time and documentation and understanding and asking questions of the things that families are doing outside of school, because an early childhood space, there's a lot of research that's actually within a discipline called education ethnography. There's a lot of research around the kind of early childhood spaces are really distinctive, very quite isolating. They've got their own kind of little microcosms of behaviours and things that happen, like little bells and hands being held and, all those little claps and all those things that educators do to kind of gain the attention of children. But really, I think a lot of those early childhood spaces would really benefit from opening their doors, opening their fences, and, spending a lot more time with families in their homes and understanding what's happening.
What have you most loved about living where you are now, and how has that changed your perception of the culture where you came from?
Yeah. I was born in Perth. My dad, he and his family came to Australia when he was 7. My mum and her family, they're all from Adelaide and from the UK originally. So, I have a British passport, and that has held me quite a privilege, because I got to do my Montessori training in Perugia, in Italy, because I had a passport. But I think coming from my own privileged background, it's up until going and working, particularly in those remote contexts in the Ngurrindjeri and Pintubi region. As someone who grew up in WA, I didn't even know that these communities existed. The education that I was given during high school in terms of geography and in terms of really that truth-telling process that a lot of people have missed out on, I think, within our, decades and centuries of education, is that we actually, we're not aware of these locations. And unless you seek to go and see them, or, you're traveling through, or you go and work in these locations, they can often be, in many respects, the kind of forgotten geographical areas of Australia. So in every way, shape or form, the way that both me and my partner, we met working out there. The way that we approach parenting is often, it has a Montessori spin to it, of course, but the main thing that we often think of is, those families in remote locations of, what would that grandmother do, or what would that mother do? Lou is crying, or something's happening, or how do we do something? It's adjusted and altered the way that I think about life always, even to the way that the privilege of having power in your house. And, families in remote communities have power cards. It's all prepaid power. And that shop, like a shop, is only open from 9 until 3, sometimes 4, Monday to Friday, half day on Saturday, closed on Sunday. So what happens when you run out of power? You have no power, and your fridge turns off, and your washing machine doesn't work, and everything in terms of that disconnection with your energy usage, you have no control over. So in so many different ways, in whether it's parenting or having a fridge, or having power in your house, to being able to fuel up your car whenever you like, when you want to go and drive somewhere. It has impacted the way that, I live my life in every aspect. Absolutely. Even to the water that you drink, being able to turn up on a tap and the tap, even in Alice Springs, it is quite calcified. Water quality in remote communities is so poor that if you have a glass of water and you leave it, say, like for this long, go away for a weekend, even go away for 2 weeks. If you go away for 2 weeks over the school holidays and have water in it, the water will be all gone, but there will be a lip of calcium that is just absolutely riddled all through the glass. And imagine that's how children and babies, if they're having milk formula, to water being consumed when you're playing in water play, to having a shower, to even just ingesting a little bit. These are the kind of impacts that have really you have to acknowledge the privilege that you have in even water quality.
So it sounds like teaching you not to take things for granted and widening your perspective has been the thing that you've most valued about living there. Are there things that you don't like about living there that you value?
Well, yeah. So many of the communities are dry communities, obviously. So that's definitely. But from a social aspect, I think there's so many other sides. Food is so expensive. $7 for a lettuce has just been normal forever. But during COVID, everyone went crazy because their food was so expensive. It was a bit like, well, welcome to the world of being remote. It's. I think it's obviously really hard to be away from your family. I've been very fortunate to build, a desert family and a desert community around you. And really, for me, that's the only reason how, if you are a non-Nantharam Pintupi person or a non-First Nations person coming to work in a First Nations community, is that you need to build your own family and become of that kinship system. So, but it is sad because, I have had great-grandparents and grandparents for very, very luckily for the majority of my life, and I've missed out on a lot of those things. So, you just really kind of make up for it and cherish those times when you're away. And they're all very supportive, obviously, of the work that I do and have been, there's definitely an element of giving up your own family, which is tricky.
Can you think what book do you think it's important that all educators should read?
Oh, educators. There is an amazing book called by a lady called Barbara Rogoff, and it's the cultural. Oh gosh, I'm off my reference list. It's called like the nature of being, or the cultural nature of being, and it basically Professor Rogoff kind of pulls apart everything about families and children and looks at it from different societal and cultural perspectives. So something like age, which I think is, it's a very Western construct because we're around birthdays and all our early childhood kind of developmental indexes run on if you're 6 months, if you're 9 months, if you're 12 months, if you're 18 months, if you're 36 months, you should be achieving all of these things. And so as Montessorians, we all know that 3 to 6, there are obviously these there's a progression in our milestones, but we're not pinpointing all of these things within a matter of 3-month periods in my eyes. And really, when I read her book, it was something that was just like, you're a Montessorian. Like, really, that is how we run, like, look at physical development, look at all the things that are around that, age doesn't have to be the only measure. That's just one example from her book. Like, her book is just completely profound, that kind of pulls out just the importance of wider family networks in different societal groups around the world, and that a biological mother and a biological father aren't the only two people who can give those I'll send the name of the book. I'll show it to you in a minute. I'll go and get the cover and make sure I've said the name right. I've written it 1,000 times, Rogoff 2014 in referencing lists, but I'll get the name of the book. But yeah, it's a profound book.
What do you think are some personal characteristics that are really important for Montessori teachers to be able to be effective, particularly in environments with other cultures, but also in environments where they're more homogenous cultures?
Being able to step back, that being able to step back and not only see the power and the importance that children themselves can have over their own lives, I think is really, really important. But also for families, to be able to step back and let families to be a part of that, to be a part of the learning and the space. But I think it's really hard for lots of people to lose control. And sometimes, there is order in a bit of chaos, Obviously, you have to set limits, and very important limits, but yeah, flexibility, adaptation, the willingness to say, I got something wrong, I didn't hit the mark on that. There's a lot of humility that needs to be involved with working with children, I think, to say, because of our own age and our own experiences, that we have all the answers and that we're going to get it right all the time. I think the greatest experience that children can have is hearing from adults and hearing from that wider people, is that, what, I think I said something the other day that maybe I didn't get that right, let's go and have a look together, or, it's important.
Just to widen the focus a bit, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges faced by Montessori education? We've talked about how we all know here how wonderful it is, and that it's really the answer to so many problems in education and wider society. But what are some of the challenges we face in bringing it to more children in Australia?
I think for anyone who's a teacher working in a Montessori space, from a time and qualification perspective, obviously we make a huge commitment of basically doing a double degree. You've got an early childhood or an education degree, plus you need to do Montessori training. So immediately for me, if someone that's done a double training like that is, it's a huge kind of personal commitment, which can be, really taxing on families. And often it's, a difficulty can just be accessing training, Montessori training itself. I see that as something that has really impacted me for over the last 10 years plus is, I went to Italy to do the training. My partner, Dave, he also did the training. So we moved to Canberra so he could do the training. It's a big point. I'm also a huge supporter of Montessori in public schools. I think obviously in the States, there's a lot more examples of where that's been, really some very positive steps. But it's tricky, and often if you're an independent Montessori school, being able to navigate, the curriculum and all those kind of things, you have a lot more kind of independence in the way that you run that. But if the challenges are for public schools is that you also have to be, keeping the Australian curriculum in your mind, and the EYLF and all these other kind of challenges. And although it can be messy and complex, I think, for me, Montessori in public schools it's a challenge, but it's definitely where, from an Australian First Nations context, where it needs to go, because sadly, we're not going to have a CMS in Warburton, remote Warburton, or in Kilgore or anywhere. It's that, it is a big challenge, but it's something that I think that can be taken on. And I've been really fortunate to meet with Department of Education WA, Department of Education NT, and federally, and people are keen. They are keen. And I always find it interesting is that when I meet with these people, I say, so Montessori education, say one word, and they go, oh, my daughter went to Montessori, or my son went to Montessori, or my grandchild goes there, or, it's like, well, why isn't it in more public schools? Yes, you're the education heads of these states and territories federally. You're happy to send your kids there, but you won't put that, not that they won't, but they're less inclined to put that style of education and pedagogy into their own teaching or learning practices in a public sector. Like, sure, you've got the money to pay for the fees, but what about everyone else? So, yeah.
What do you think? What do we need to do to change this? If you can think of one or two things that would really help turn this around. At the moment, Montessori serves 1,200. So I think my back of the napkin calculation is it serves 1,200ths of 1% of children in Australia, and 0.5% of schools in Australia are Montessori. How can we turn this around?
As much as the materials are really beautiful, I think when we show images of Montessori spaces or talk about Montessori, we use these beautiful, beautifully decked out, resourced locations. And I think what the power is that, yes, Montessori has these materials, but you don't have to set up every early childhood space or every space with these very, very expensive materials. They can be made. And like we spoke about before, it's that, for me, it's that essence of a Montessori space that is so important. And the more that we fixate on, whether everything is, millimeter perfect on some kind of card or whatever it might be, a material, whether it's the right blue or the wrong blue, which I think that conversation is absolutely ridiculous at the best of times. But like, there has to be a little more nuance in the conversation about Montessori, is that it's not only materials. There's such huge power in the way that a classroom is set up, and whether you're making it out of, old pallets and, milk crates, or whether you've got the most beautiful shelves with the most perfect wooden trays, it's not the be all and end all. And yeah, it's that essence of the pedagogy itself that's so important and can lend itself to so many spaces around Australia.
How do you think we can make Montessori training more accessible for more people? Quality training.
Yeah. I think the COVID world has shown us that, and just like this, kind of seminar meeting today, is that online is the way of the world. We have such an amazing Montessori community globally, and there is nothing better than being in a room or a building or, a conference space filled with other Montessorians, of hearing the stories of how they're implementing Montessori across the globe. So I think we really need to harness this online kind of aspect of training. And I get that there is a lot of power in watching someone demonstrate the presentation face to face, and the experience and the cohort of your, your peers when you complete the training, all those kind of things. But I think the online world is not going away, and it is here, and it is here to stay. And I think we can really harness that in a much better way.
Mm. I want to open it up. Does anybody listening have questions for Catherine? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask, if you speak up if you'd like to.
Me. I like to thank you for what you were talking about, because I'm working with Philip Montessori together, You probably have heard about him. He's a great-grandson of Maria Montessori. He himself is not Montessori trained, but he has one goal, and this goal is simply to make, like a missionary, making Montessori available for everyone.
Yeah.
I'm talking with him since about nearly 4 years about it. It's a bit hard to get things done, but meanwhile we're working on a plan simply to make Montessori available for everyone by simply following the nextgenu.org principle. Erica Frank from nextgenu.org, when you look there, she has made all the medical field education freely available for everyone. So she has a lot of courses which meanwhile got accepted by universities. And Erica Frank is also interested in Montessori because her family was involved in Montessori in Canada and US. And so the idea is simply to implement a free Montessori course. AMI might not like this, but simply a free Montessori course with all the materials, with all our AMI training, what we have, into the Next Gen U context, so that actually everyone, parents and teachers and anybody who is interested in Montessori, can actually start reading about Montessori and learning about Montessori, and also that the materials is a pretty simple thing actually. Nienhuis has some other publishers from these materials. They have some kind of monopole on it, and this drives the prices in tremendous high regions, and this makes it inaccessible. Accessibility is no more it's not Montessori. The problem is the commerce, and this started in 60s actually in the US, and from there it spread all around the world that Montessori has to be commercialized, and this is the bad thing actually what happened. And meanwhile it's all around the world, even here in Thailand. The Montessori schools are incredibly expensive, and to get public schools it's very, very hard. Even they have now a project to build up public schools here in Thailand, but there are only a few where you can really see that really things are happening like they should happen.
Thanks, Andy.
About Montessori and looking a little bit beside it.
Yeah.
So not looking like this year Montessori. I did the same in Germany in 1987, building up a family center. I started as a student, secondary school student, and had the problem with who could I train to help me. Actually, in this way, only the parents. So I think the main key in this whole thing is the parent education, actually.
Yeah.
So when we are able, as a Montessori teacher, to train our parents, then the parents can convert to be Montessorians or Montessori parents, let's say it like this here, and help us actually to get Montessori also in public schools.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. So, Catherine, there seems to be, there's a tension between quality and accessibility.
Yeah.
I guess there always has been. Where do you see that line?
Yeah, I think it's such a tricky conversation because, having done AMI training and, but also being a part of, very fortunately seeing, other training that's happened around Australia, and it just needs to be accessible. And yeah, that is the biggest challenge, I think. And really the online platform is really a way that, maybe it's not in terms of, getting a diploma or, we've had so many conversations over the years about, whether it's creating certificate 3, certificate 4s, in different education sectors and in different languages, in different contexts. But yeah, I think it's almost like if you're talking about Western education and First Nations education, there's two streams of pedagogies that are coming together. Montessori is almost a third, aspect in all of this conversation is they all rub up against each other at some point, and how we kind of navigate how all these things to come together is the hardest part of it all. And in a public school, that's where you're seeing all of these things rubbing up against each other. I think it just takes yeah, some flexibility, you know, some really dedicated people to be able to kind of get it going and get it kind of set within a Montessori space. But it doesn't have to be diplomas. It doesn't have to be this kind of, you know, face-to-face perfection of training. It could just be, like you say, is around that kind of parent education and adult education. It's how many times as a teacher at a Montessori school have you seen a parent carrying a 6-year-old and they're, you know, carrying their bag, organizing all their stuff when they get there, putting their drink bottle down for them, putting their lunchbox away for them. I think you have no idea of being a Montessori parent is like, let them get out of the car themselves, let them walk down themselves, let them put their shoes on by themselves. Like, really, was this not, this is like 101 parent information that you're trying to give. And teachers are trying so hard. Like, I know, you know, having been one of those people, you know, working in the wonderful Canberra context, is that you see all of that all the time. And you think, if you just allowed that space and the time for your child to do it themselves, it could be possible. But yeah, there's so many.
You talked about this double training as one of the big impediments of, you know, Montessori path. Have you figured out the work-life balance?
Look, I am a month out.
Maybe I shouldn't ask that. You finished the PhD, right?
No, I'm definitely worked it out a lot better. I think, you know, work isn't life. You need to have heaps of other hobbies that, you know, really kind of, you know, get you over the line from a professional sense. And obviously I'm 34 years old and I feel like I've been studying forever. But I failed.
What's the hobby that's kept you going?
Running, absolutely running. Yeah, it is. It's challenging, but it's definitely kept me going. But I think, yeah, as long as there's balance, as long as you can work a little bit, play a little bit, and, you know, have a good balance, that's all that matters. And even if, you know, the kids in your class are still being carried down by their parent at 10, you know, like, at least you just, you know, you do what you can do, and you can't, you know, drop the child out of their arms for them, you know. There's a certain element of, you just have to keep plugging on and do what you do.
Yeah. Before we go, I just have to ask about the bananas. I've lost some good news.
The bananas are ripe.
They're ripe. I didn't see it.
Yeah, a friend sent that to me during COVID with a toddler while doing a PhD, and it seemed good. Yeah.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much. It's been so fun chatting with you. I really have enjoyed our conversation, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening.
No. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you giving up your Monday nights, and it's really beautiful to see all those little children's faces and babies kind of coming in and out of the screen. I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you so much, and I'm sure I'll see you all again soon.
Hope so.
All right.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Goodbye, Catherine. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.